All right, 1 second here. All right, so we're holding by the book of Leviticus, chapter 18. Again, we're holding by the book of Leviticus, chapter 18. We're in verse 5. Still working our way through Orach Chaim Makadosh over here. Says the Torah, Shmartem es Chukotzai ves Mishpatai Asher Yasu Esam Ha'adam V'chai Behem Ani Hashem. So again, the Torah says, you shall therefore keep my ordinances, things that don't make sense, and my judgments, things that do make sense, which a man shall do, shall live in them. Right? Very strange language over here. We'll speak more about. I am the eternal. Now, we saw before, the Orach Chaim Makadosh brought down, right, from the Gemara in Sota, 31a, that the Gemara says, person who does things out of fear, right, mitzvahs out of fear, right, you get merit for like 1,000 generations. You do things out of love, the merit's double that. Right, so you see, coming to love of God is greater than fear of God, even though we spoke last week, we said that fear of God's the base, right, the base of everything, as as brought down by King Solomon himself. That King Solomon himself says in Proverbs that the beginning of wisdom is fear. Right? The beginning of wisdom is fear. You always need fear. Fear may not lead to love. Love certainly will lead to fear. Right? So we spoke about that. The lowest level of fear is you're afraid you're going to fry in hell forever. Highest level of fear, understanding that God runs the world, God's in charge, the awesomeness of what he does in nature, and all that. This comes on the Orach Chaim Makadosh further. And he says, the Torah says, right now, we saw before, what does it mean to live by the Torah? Right, Rashi said, oh, Haba. Sorry about the next world. In other words, to live it means you're going to get reward in the next world. Because if you're going to tell me, Rashi says, you're talking about this world, yeah, this world's going to die. Right, everyone knows you're going to die. Very good. They must be talking about the spiritual world. Okay, then, Orach Chaim Makadosh came along, and we said, to live by them, not to die by them. But there are certain mitzvahs you have to give up your life for any time, any place, right? One of them is murder, one of them is idolatry, one of them is immorality. So we talked about that as well. Comes on the Orach Chaim Makadosh over here, and he says like this. He says a person, the Torah says, let's say better. The Torah says the Torah says you're going to live by it. Very good. What does that mean? That a person keeps Torah through love. You got to keep it because you love Torah, you love God, so to speak, and it's going to be good for you in this world, all the more in the future world, right? In the spiritual world. Right now, we said before, what are you talking about? Person's going to die in this world, right? How's it going to be good? How is it possible? How is it possible it's going to be good? Right? We have troubles. We suffer. We go through all kinds of things, all kinds of difficulties. Right? The Ramchal says, we mentioned many times, the Ramchal says, you're in this world to toil. Right? You're in this world to struggle. Right? Very good. So what's going on? Right? He says you're going to get the goodness even more than the spiritual world, meaning in this world. So he says, there's a hint over here. What does it say? It says, Va kai behem. And you will live by them. What's the vav? What's the extra vav over here? So the extra vav, he says, is a hint. What's the hint? He says to teach you there's something Even though we know you're going to get merit later in the next world, something going to be even greater than that. Now we can't imagine. Right? We can't imagine what that world is like, what the reward is, the reward in that world is like. As my Rebbe said, never met anyone been in that world to come back. Right? So we don't know. But he's saying it's going to be greater. The reward is going to be greater. But he said it's rewards that's hidden. Reward that's hidden. Yeah, that is doing mitzvahs with great love. So the Arizal, a blessed memory of Isaac Uriah, famous for his work on Kabbalah, his commentary on Kabbalah, on the Zohar, says, what's the reward a person may get in this world? Because we're going to see, right? We're going to see, I don't know if we'll see today, maybe next week we'll see, that the Gemara says, Gemara in Kedushin, 39b, it says, Char mitzvah maleka, the reward of a mitzvah in this world, there is none. Right? There's no reward for a mitzvah in this world. Where's the reward of the mitzvah for the mitzvah? Next world. In the spiritual world. So what's he talking about? What's he talking about over here? So says the Arizal, the reward you could get for part of the mitzvah you did, for part of the mitzvah, not the full mitzvah, let's say, because you get reward in the next world also. What's the reward you may get in this world? The reward may be because you did the mitzvah with great joy. Right? So I don't know if the Arizal or Chaim Vital, one of them, a student, said that everything he merited in this world could have been the Arizal, I forget. I don't remember 100%, right? But it was said that the Torah that they learned, and the reward that they got in this world, we're not saying, they became millionaires and all that. But the spiritual world, they got and what they felt and whatever, they got because they did the mitzvah with great joy. That's what they merited. Yeah, their knowledge, everything was because they did the mitzvah with great joy. But he says, what we said before, right? What did we say in verse 4? Verse 4, we said, go in the ways, do the mitzvahs that make sense, do the mitzvahs don't make sense. I am the Lord your God, i.e., right? Hashem Elokeichem, Lord of mercy, Elokeichem, the Lord of fear, judgment. So he says that's going to be by love. If you keep it with great joy and with love, right? The spiritual reward is hidden. Right? Can you imagine what that is? Okay. But if you do it out of fear, it's on this world. How are you going to get the reward in this world? That's going to be in the spiritual world. Very good. Because what did you do? What did you do over here? It says that you went to God's ways. That's what you did. Right? In verse 4, right, it says, if the commandments that you do understand, you do. Yes, we'll go to the ones you don't understand. Tishmaru, you guard. La lechet behem. You go in their ways. I am the Lord your God, i.e. the God of judgment. So it says over there to go in their ways. Go in God's way over here. What does it mean? Right? It means reward the next one. Yeah. It means not in this world. Why aren't you going to get rewarded in this world? Because you're only serving seemingly out of fear. So what's fear going to do? It'll get you the next world. It'll get you a portion of the world to come. Yeah, but the ultimate is to serve God with great joy. So if you serve God with great joy, what's going to happen? You get in this world also. You get that divine reward also. But if you serve out of fear, it's only the next one. We're not talking about anything this one. So then he says, okay, what's the idea? What's the idea that it says, okay, that you are going to live by them. Right? To live by them means not the future alone. Not only talking about the future world. Right? Why? How do I know? So Torah Chaim Makadosh, how do I know? Because he says, if that was the case, it should have said V'yichyeh, and he will live. Yeah, what Yichyeh mean? Future. Future tense. It says V'chai, live now. Rashi already said it can't be now. It has to be talking about the spiritual world because you're going to die. Right? Everyone's going to die in this world. So if you wanted to tell me about the future, yeah, it should have used different language. It should have said V'yichyeh, not V'chai b'hem. Should have said V'yichyeh, future tense. Right? The reason you see over here is, but he says, from that which I see, for this reason, this mitzvah, it says V'chai b'hem. That you're gonna live it. Right? You gotta live by them. So I have two things here. One is I can live by them, with great joy, right? With love, right? And what will that do? That'll give me unbelievable life in this world. Unbelievable life in this world. Now, does that mean everything's going to be easy? No. Definitely doesn't mean everything's going to be easy, right? But you feel spiritually very different. Very, very different. But fear, where does fear go over here? Fear is about the next one. Yeah, fear can keep a person out of trouble. True. Can keep a person out of trouble. Can stop from doing bad things, let's say, or things that are forbidden. Love's a whole different thing. Right? In other words, if a person has fear, right? Let's just analyze this for a second. Person has fear. Serving God only out of fear. Yeah, they don't want to make mistakes. Terrified to do anything because they don't want the repercussions. So they have this fear. Okay. So fear is good. Fear, again, as we said before, I'm not going to hop on this because we spoke about it, right? Fear over here means what? As King Solomon said, fear is the beginning of all wisdom. Fear is crucial, right? But we said before, we mentioned last week, right? Fear, you serve God out of fear, you get the merit of 1,000 generations. Serve out of love, you get double that. You get double that, get even more than that. So fear is what we always say you need. That's the base, right? Fear will not necessarily lead you to love. Love will lead you to fear, as we said, right? And he says over here, he says, I got the extra vav. It says, V'chai b'hem, right? I have the extra vav, right? To teach you that what? If you're serving God out of love, right? The reward we can't imagine. Yeah, the reward can even be in this world. Now, isn't it hard to feel that? Isn't it hard, as we always say, isn't it hard to sing and dance all the time? With issues, right? We have a lot of issues to deal with. Health, livelihoods, family, where we live. I mean, million things. 1.5 million things to deal with. So the Ramchal, we always say, tells us that what you're in this world to toil. Yeah? You're going to struggle in this world. Some will struggle more, some will struggle less. So you'll say, how can a person serve God out of love? Right? Someone had asked before, the following question. Right? What was the question? Question was, like this. Right? How common is it life seemingly falls apart while in the process of conversion? Good question. Happens if you become religious as an Orthodox Jew, right? Even, if you were secular. It's not just non-Jews converting, right? Secular Jew becomes a religious, it's also about hardship. They have a lot of hardship, a lot of difficulty. Yeah, it could be with family, it could be with money, it could be with all kinds of things, right? It could be many, many different things. It could be everything at once, right? Now, it's supposed to be hard, right? Obviously, the process is supposed to be hard, but life is not supposed to be easy. One of the things my Rebbe says, I mentioned to someone recently, and that is what's the person has to look out for? Let's say everything's going good in general. Doesn't mean, it doesn't mean you don't have things that bother you or whatever. Let's say things are going, in general, they're going good. Or they're going exceedingly well. So Rebbe says, how do you know you haven't got your own mob in this world? You haven't got your portion in this world. Maybe after 120 years, you're going to die. What's going to happen? In nothing. Poof! You got all your own mob in this world. Doesn't mean you didn't struggle, whatever. Well, let's say you had it easier. Different things. Right? Let's say. So how do you know you weren't being punished for that? Oh, what's the answer? What's the answer? You don't know. You don't know 100%. You could say, well, if things are going hard, most likely you didn't get rewards, in this world. But things are going very hard. But if a person, seemingly doesn't have so many problems and life is going good, for the most part, doesn't mean you don't have any issues, right? But for the most part, why aren't you worried that, your own hobbit just went in the garbage? Why aren't you worried you lost it? Right? Kind of doom and gloom over here. You have it hard, it's one thing, you can't deal with life, whatever. Okay. You have it easy, who says it's supposed to be that easy? Right? Who says you're not supposed to be complaining? Maybe I got my own hobby now. Maybe I got it in this world. Well, what's really going on? It's going to be a struggle. Less than 20%, as we always say, who start the conversion process, even they're accepted by a rabbinical court, finish. Less than 20%. The very small percentage. That's a lot of reason. Right? It could be financial, it could be they can't move, it could be a million different reasons. It could be, family pressure. Let's say they have to take care of the parents. Parents much older, they can't leave. They have to be near them. Okay. Could be an onus, could be not, whatever. There's a lot of issues. Right? It's a lot of struggle. But why is it in general people struggle? What's the reason? What's behind it? What's the very simple answer? Simple answer is, right now, a person comes to realization. There's a God in the world, right? They may have believed in God before, but now they believe the real God, right? God of the Jewish people. They want to be part of the Jewish people, or they want to be a Noahide, either way. Yeah, so now they have a different level of understanding, right? Says Corbin Aaron, we talked about it last week. Last week's parsha spoke about death of Nadav and Avihu. Says Or Chaim HaKadosh is the name of the Corbin Aaron, as we mentioned many times there, right? In the book of Leviticus over there, what do we say? You want to be close to the king, get burnt. Now, there are many potential reasons why Nadav and Avihu died. Doesn't matter. It doesn't really matter what the reason is. The point is, you want to be close to the king, it's different. It's very, very different. If you're a potato farmer in Idaho, no offense. Anyone's a potato farmer, grew up in Idaho, what happened? God looks at you differently. Right? He looks at you like the most important question you ever asked in your lifetime. I put ketchup, mustard, and relish on my hot dog. That's where most people are holding. So that's how you're going to be treated. Most things you do is probably by accident, you know what you're doing anyway. It's not a real rebellion. Even though every transgression a person does really is a rebellion against God, this is time. This is desire. Yeah, ignorance is 100% bliss. Obviously, there are things you got to pay him more of a price for. Okay. God's going to look at you one way. Now, what happens when you want to draw closer? when you want to be close to the king. Now, essentially, you want to be close to the king. What happens? There's more responsibility. What we call in rabbinic scripture, we call it achrayut or achrayus, depending on how you want to pronounce it. It means taking responsibility. That's what achrayut is. Right? It's responsibility. Here, in Israel or anywhere else, you buy something, they say, okay, 3 months achrayut. In other words, anything goes wrong within 3 months, we'll deal with it. Or a year, whatever it may be. But you got to take responsibility. So now you're looking at the world very different. Right? Now you want to have an open relationship with God. Now you're going to work hard. Okay. But the repercussions are much greater. What's at stake over here is much greater. Because if you want to be close to the king, as the Korban Aaron said over there, you want to be close to the king, you get burnt. Literally, you can get burnt. And you can get messed up in many different ways. Many, many different ways. Right? So the question is, well, why does it feel like everything's falling apart? This is part of the test. It's exactly part of the test. Sometimes harder, sometimes easier. It could be all kinds of things going on at once. Okay, that's part of the test. Right? The essence of this generation, meaning the test of this generation before the Messiah comes, is what? Is emunah b'tochum. It's faith and belief in God. That is the test. Am I going to hold on for dear life, no matter what happens, or not? Am I going to fall by the wayside? Or am I just going to give up hope? It's easy to give up hope. Very easy to give up hope. Gemara Bracha says, if there's a sword against your throat, against your neck, there's still hope. You might die. Right? You may die. God can have mercy even at that point. Right? But we have to hold on. You're on a boat, it's going down, the whole storm, right? And it's going back and forth. You think the whole boat's gonna, rip apart. Maybe it will. Maybe it won't, but at the end of the day, what do we have to see? What do we have to see beyond the shadow of a doubt? We have to see that the only person can help us is Avinu Shabbat His Father in heaven. That's it. He's the one in control, right? He's the one calling the shots. That's it. Right? So we have to make the best of it. We can make mistakes. Evil creation can get to us. All kinds of things can happen. Right? Many, many things can happen. But the closer a person comes, it's more responsibility. And the more responsibility means is that exactly that. For something, someone else does, and they're holding, let's say, nowhere in the world, God deals with it one way. If a person wants to draw close, they want to draw close to the king, what can happen? What can happen, as we said before, you get burnt. So a person can say, well, I'd rather have fantasy. Okay. But you can get punished for that also. Why? Because let's say you have greater potential. You don't know what your potential is. Nobody does. So if you don't know what your potential is, can you rest on your laurels? Can you say, I'm happy being mediocre? No. You got to work. And you might be slammed all over the place. You might be slammed. People may, degrade you. People may make fun of you. People may say all kinds of things. Yeah. That's also part of the test. Can we hack it? Can we take it? Nobody likes to fight against the world. Not even me. Yeah. There's times you get tired. You get tired of listening to the same thing over and over and over. Right? People make fun and people may scoff and people this. And you can be religious 20 years, 30, it doesn't matter. They remember you way back when, so they'll say this, they'll say that. Eventually you get tired of it. Yeah, but okay, that's part of life. And let's say you get treated, let's say the family like second-class citizen. Let's say you have siblings, right? Siblings treated one way, you treat another way. It's like looking at a totally different family. What happened? Aren't you part of the same family? No. Why not? You discriminate against. I'm not saying in every single case it's got to be like that, but many will be like that. And they're going to make sure that you know, and everyone else around you knows, you're different. They're going to make it known. It's very clear. Right? Sometimes better, sometimes not. Okay. Depends on the situation. Don't you get tired of it? Get tired of listening to the same thing? Someone told something, someone said something, whatever. Yeah, just kind of like a backhanded comment. Right? So I said, come on, is that the best you got? I was like, that's really the best you have? Come on, you can think of something better, I'm sure. It's easier than me ripping them to shreds. I mean, it's too easy. I said, you know, I have an answer for this. Probably a 5. Yeah. I can probably demolish you in like 35 seconds. But you know what? You didn't even give me a best shot. Yeah. Once, whatever, I used to teach at night, give informal classes at a certain place. And I told these guys, I said, well, I'm going out meeting an old friend of mine I went to college with. He was finishing up becoming a rabbinical student for the Reconstruction. I don't even know really what the Reconstruction is. You never really believe it. I don't know, somewhere between conservative reform. I don't know, whatever it is. Whatever it is. So I happened to be in Israel. I met him at some, where did I meet him? At some book fair or something. There was some book fair. Okay. Right. So he tells me, at Hebrew University finishing up his ordination. So I said, okay, taking different classes, whatever. And one of the things he tells me is, I'm taking a class in Kabbalah, right? I'm taking a class in Kabbalah. So we went, we learned together or studied together. I don't want to say learn. Studied together at JTS, Theological Seminary in New York, head of the conservative movement. So there you never learn these subjects because I don't know how to teach any of these things. So what do? They teach you about it, like historical analysis, right? Let's say. So I asked him. So I said, oh, so you're learning about it. Not actually like learning Kabbalah. You're learning, I don't know, history. History about Kabbalah, right? History about Jewish mysticism. That's what I said. So his answer was like, no, I'm learning about the spheres. I'm learning about the, what do you call it? The 10 spiritual worlds and this and that and, whatever. So his answer was, if I'm going to be a heretic, if I'm going to be an Abikoros, I should know what I'm going to be a heretic about. That's what he said. In other words, I'm studying this because, whatever, I'm going to be a heretic anyway. But, if you're going to be a heretic, you have to actually know something, right? You have to know a lot actually to be a heretic, in many cases. But without even, going there, that was his answer. His answer was, if I'm going to be a heretic, then at least I should know what I'm going to be a heretic about. So I said, Esther, or as Madonna calls herself, right? Quote Madonna here, she'll be probably very happy quoting her. I said, she also learns Kabbalah. Supposedly. Right? Change her name to Esther. Okay. Yeah, she also learns Kabbalah. Very good. So I said, if she can learn Kabbalah and she doesn't know the Aleph Beis, I said, you can also learn Kabbalah. Right? He started to laugh. He's like, oh, it's very funny. I was like, no, but I wasn't joking. I said, you've never learned the tractate of Talmud in your life. You don't know very much about anything when it comes to Torah. So I said, if you don't know anything about Torah, so you can also learn Kabbalah. What's the difference? Even if it's very watered down and a this and a that, not really learning real Kabbalah. Very good. So I said, if she can learn it, you can learn it. That was my answer. So what do I tell the story? Because I told these guys the next night, I said, come on, you guys at least give me a run for my money. I said, this was easy. I said, this is an easy answer. God put in my mind, to say, like, flatten this person like a pancake. I was like, come on, you really learning it? Come on, you never learned anything in depth. When it comes to Torah, real learning. Rashi, the Ramban, and Chumash, and, learning Gemara, you never learned anything. You want to tell me you're really learning Kabbalah? I said, Madonna's learning Kabbalah. I was like, well, that was a good answer. I said, I know. I said, I was very proud of myself for that. Yeah. I said, at least you guys give me a run for my money. Yeah, guys, they're thinking. You guys have good questions sometimes. Yeah, sometimes. Yeah, this was nothing. This was zero. Right? I didn't break a sweat. Didn't have to look up anything. I was like, come on, really? Like I said to the other person, come on. Like, that's the best you have? Really? That's the best you have? You can be 10 times smarter than me. Doesn't matter. You can have 120 IQ. Okay. This, you're a dimwit. With a capital D. Right? You're a doofus. Tell me you're learning Kabbalah. Give me a break. You know Hebrew. You can know how to pray. Okay, good. You know how to pray. Right? In order to learn, calculus, you got to study trigonometry and algebra. Right? To learn how to run, you need to know how to walk and crawl. Right? This is the reason you don't jump levels. Right? You can't have deep knowledge, right? Really esoteric knowledge, trying to understand what it means, right? In order that what? Right? In order that you think you know something. Yeah? In order to think you know something. You can't jump levels over here. You really think you're going to understand the depth of Torah? The secrets of Torah, the real secrets of Torah, in the real depth? If you barely know the Aleph base? Really? That's what you think you're learning? Like, come on. Of course you're never going to get it. It makes perfect sense. Right? But if I want to be a heretic, okay, so be a heretic. There are different ways to be a heretic. Okay. Right? But to say I'm actually learning it, I mean, come on, it's a joke. Right? Get all these Kabbalah centers all over the world. Somehow, some Jews, that's how they come to Torah mitzvahs. Because they want to learn, depth of the Torah, like the, secrets of the Torah. Okay. So again, you take an idea. I'm not, very fond of this, but whatever, you take an idea, take a deep idea, right? So if a person has the ability to bring it down to this world, explain it in a way people are going to get something from it. I mean, because if you look at it, it's going to be like gibberish. You're not going to figure it out. I mean, I know, a lot of people learn Tanya. Tanya is one of the hardest books to read in Jewish philosophy. A lot of it is steeped in Kabbalah and Hasidus. That wouldn't be one of the first, books in Jewish philosophy I tell people to read, right? You go through Musar books first, you go through, let's say, Path of the Just, you go through the Ways of the Righteous, you go through Shari Tshuva, Gates of Repentance, right? Then, you go to, let's say, the Chovos HaLevavos is very good, right? Duties of the Heart, very solid book. Maybe some people go to Derech Hashem, the Way of God, about, how to live in this world, and it's also a very deep book. Kabbalistically, but just getting basic ideas. What my purpose in the world is, reward and punishment, purpose of the nation, what the world looked like before Adam and Eve sinned. I mean, like deep questions. Why do people suffer? Spiritual forces. Okay. Once the person has a certain level of knowledge under their belt, and they studied other things beforehand, then I tell you go to the Tanya. Then you go there. Even if someone's got a water down, I did see, I don't know, I was looking up something for something and came across someone was writing explanation, right, on Tanya. Whatever. So I happened to click it on, and I was going through it. And I'm like, how in the world is a layperson, not even a layperson, less than a layperson, can understand what this person's talking about? I mean, I understood a little bit. I mean, some of it. Right, but I, a certain level of background. So, I'm certainly not well versed in Hasidus by any stretch, and certainly not Kabbalah. But explaining, different things, even if it's somewhat watered down, let's say, you might get something out of it, right? Granted, right? I'll cut you a little bit of slack. You might get something out of it. You're not going to get what you need out of it. And it's way above you, right? People want to study all these things that are so way above them that, they're basic things to study first. If a person has enough background, good. Then you go to deeper things. And then you go to other things. Okay, I can hear that. Right? I can certainly hear that. Right? It doesn't go the other way. Right? It doesn't go the other way, right? It doesn't go starting things you don't have a clue about, and then you're going to read that and work your way backwards. That doesn't work. Study calculus and then go down to algebra. It's not going to work. And a person's never going to start running before they learn how to crawl. Doesn't work that way. It's backwards, right? It's totally backwards. But again, some people come to Torah mitzvahs that way. When I was in South America, a whole bunch of Jews there that I met all got interested in Judaism through the Kabbalah Center, through this Kabbalah Center. Someone spoke at their house, someone's house, a whole bunch of families there. I started Spanish. A lot of them spoke Hebrew, then I went to Hebrew, then I went to English, I went back to Spanish, whatever. I spoke about, it was right before Passover. So I spoke about, what happened. What happened with the story. A story coming out of Egypt. So, after a couple hours, they had a few breaks in between. So after a couple hours, at the end, I said, I want to make one point. I want to make one very subtle point. I said, everything that was said today at a relatively deep level, nothing had anything to do with Kabbalah. Zero. Nothing. So I mentioned one thing had to do with Kabbalah. So I said, I want people to understand that Torah is deep and there's a lot of depth without Kabbalah. Now, there are people that are drawn to it. Okay. Right? There are people drawn to it. Very good. Everyone's drawn to different things. Some people like to learn Chumash. Some people like to learn Jewish law, halakha. Some people like to learn Gemara. Some people like to learn Musar. Some people like to learn Jewish philosophy, right? Everyone according to what they want to study, certain things you have to study anyway, right? To know what to do. Jewish law you have to study, right? Guys should learn Gemara, whatever, but certain things you may have to study anyway, right? Chumash, everyone should learn Chumash every week, right? Certain Torah portion of the week, right? But again, people are drawn to different things. They're definitely drawn to different things. Not everyone's going to be drawn exactly to the same thing. Right? Some things you have to learn anyway. Okay. But you're not necessarily drawn, to the same thing. So I understand, people want deeper explanations. They feel like that's part of their soul. That's their, I don't know, it's part of their soul makeup because that's what speaks to them. Okay. It's not a contradiction to anything. You have to be ready for it also. 100% you have to be ready. You can't study something you're not ready for. Right? Now, you would think that's obvious. Right? I've spoken about this a lot. Yeah, you would think that that's obvious. It's not obvious. People don't see any contradiction with that. People don't see any issue with it. Right? What's the problem? Why can't I study it? If you tell people you're allowed to study it, no big deal. If you tell people you shouldn't study it, everyone wants to learn it. That's exactly the point. Right? It's taboo or, whatever. But, at the end of the day, how much is the person really going to get out of it? It sounds very deep. Yeah, it sounds great. Someone asked me something, whatever, probably a few years ago. Someone asked me something, and I don't know, they listened to some class or whatever. So Rabbi mentioned X, Y, and Z. And they're like, what is this? Like, how do you understand this? So I said, it's a good question. Let me look around. And sure enough, right, it was an explanation Kabbalah. It's a Kabbalistic, explanation on something. Right? So, I wasn't surprised. It didn't ring a bell to me. I mean, plenty of things I don't know, but, I wasn't, when I saw it, it made sense that I didn't hear about it. Right? I'm not, in tune with all Kabbalistic things and different things on different something, some things I am, but, many things, I wouldn't know. Just haven't studied it. So, okay. Right? But, I guess this thing was quoted. This reason was quoted. It wasn't really explained, right, where it came from. And explained like this, that, and the other thing based on that. So it's like, well, what is it? Where's it come from? Whatever. And sure enough, it's Kabbalah. It was Kabbalah. So, there are people, yeah, they will, give over deeper things. They will for sure give over deeper things, because that's what draws people. Okay. I mean, I gave a class twice on Derech Hashem, on the way of God, and I didn't go anything in Kabbalah, right? I mean, explain basic things, how it works, how spiritual worlds work, spiritual forces, right? Reward and punishment. Spent a while on that. Belief in God and what it means, and all these different things, which I think are, which are good to learn, right? Explain them in depth, but not at that level. Certainly not at that level. First of all, I wouldn't be capable of doing it anyway. But even if I was, I wouldn't give it over that way because I wouldn't understand it. I mean, there's some people who like to speak way above people, so no one understands what they say. I don't know. I don't know what the purpose in that is. Doesn't make any sense to me, right? Doesn't mean you have to spoon feed, and give over every last piece of information, right? You let people think. Let people come to their own conclusion. Let people think. You don't necessarily spoon feed everything, right? Necessary. Okay, that I could hear. That I could hear. But to speak in words at a level that no one's going to get, you want to show how intellectual you are or what level of knowledge. I don't know. What's the point? The point is you want people to take away something. You want people to learn something. You want people to be lost in the first 5 seconds or first 10 minutes, and you're speaking like way over their head. So, for some people it's not easy to do. It's easy to do. Not that hard to do. You can lose people very quickly, right? Depending on the level of knowledge. But what's the point? Do you want people to remember the message or not? And if they don't get the message, then what are you speaking them for? Yeah, then I'm totally lost, right? Totally. What do you call it? Totally lost. Let me deal with this 1 second. Somebody asked, oh, come on, the trolls are back. Yeah, very good to have trolls back here. Means I must be doing something right. Somebody asked, who's Ibn Ezra? Ibn Ezra, one of the great commentaries, lived in Spain. One of the great commentaries on Chumash. Ibn Ezra was, I think that's what you're talking about, that his explanation on Chumash is usually he explains according to grammar. Right? It's a very big, very, very big grammarian. Right? So he explains, a lot of things in the Torah according to grammar. This commentary upheld by all Orthodox Jews. Yes. And what's the difference between Rashi's commentary with Ibn Ezra? Rashi goes a simple explanation many times. Sometimes when simple explanation isn't enough, he'll say, I have to explain it through a medrash. Ibn Ezra does not do that. Ibn Ezra is very much on the words itself, right? Explaining the words grammatically and how grammatically it fits in or doesn't fit in, and then what it represents. So they're very different, right? Very different in that sense. Yeah, so that is that's the difference. That's the difference. But again, what do you have over here? People today want deep explanation. They don't just want, some people just want simple explanation. Okay, it depends on the person, right? But other people want to go deeper. Yeah, very good. Yeah, it's not a problem. Today even, in the Lithuanian yeshivas, they're learning Hasidic Sfarim. Siva Shalom from the Baba of Rebbe, other things because they want to learn deeper. In Jewish philosophy, and different things. Yeah, so that's okay. Because, they want to get, a certain level, let's say a certain level of depth on different things. Okay, not the standard, but people want depth today. They don't just want, simple explanation and whatever. It doesn't, to some people, it doesn't speak to them. To other people, they need the depth, because of all kinds of other things going on. They want to see, like, what's the next level behind it? What's the level after that? What's going on, in a deeper sense. So I had somebody, very funny story. that someone contacted me, and they said this person wasn't my student, but someone, I had a student that this person was in contact with, and then I happened to speak to this rabbi contacted me, so they told me about somebody else, that was learning Derech Hashem. And someone was, I guess, a medical student, probably a doctor by now, whatever. They were medical students, and they're in the process of conversion. And this was this person's first, this rabbi's first post, really, on his own. And this woman started asking him questions based on the book Derech Hashem, like whatever deep questions. So anyway, so I was speaking to this rabbi. So he told me, he said, I had this woman, interested in converting. He started asking me these deep questions. Now he's more modern Orthodox for, just throw this out there also, right? Certainly not ultra Orthodox by any stretch, but okay. So he tells me this is a little strange. This is weird. Why is she asking these questions? Like he thought that, someone asking those kinds of questions, maybe they're missionary, maybe they're this, it's strange. So I said that, I said, can you explain it? So I said, yeah, I think a very simple explanation. This woman's looking for depth. She wants to understand deep things, like, reward and punishment. Why evil people have it easy. Why righteous people suffer. Yeah, that's what she wants. Not to exclude, basic things, kashrus, blessings, Shabbos. Yeah, she wants more, she wants to go in depth also, these type of things. Or at least understand, to a certain extent, these type of things. Yeah, she wants to go deeper. Now, this rabbi thought it was weird. Right? That she wants to learn, these things more in depth. So he told me, she started asking him, like, these different questions. Now, obviously, he wasn't fully grounded on the questions. Yeah, so he said, like, what should I do? He said, what should I do? In this case. So I said, I said, give me my free advice. I got a great idea. He said, yeah, what's that? I go buy the book and learn it. That's what I told him. Buy the book, Derech Hashem, whatever translation you want. There are, good translations out there. Buy the book and actually sit down and learn it. You don't have to learn it according to Kabbalah. It doesn't matter. Just read through it. Not an easy book to go through. I said, go through it. That's what you should do. I said, if you go through it, you might not think she's so weird. Because people want answers. People want depth. They want to know what happens in the next world. They want to know why am I suffering? Why am I going through hardship? Is this world the ultimate? Or other people have it easy and they don't care? And they blaspheme and they do all kinds of terrible things? These are good questions. They're not new questions, they're age-old questions. So a person, looks into that, it's not being weird. They want answers. Reincarnation. Very interesting topic. Yeah, people understand, how does it work? What do spiritual forces do? Can I see them? What about sorcery? What about other things? Good, these are good questions. They're legitimate questions, not weird questions. Unless someone doesn't know anything, just trying to learn at a much deeper level, okay, that's a different issue. But these are legitimate questions. So I said, I got a great idea. I said, give me my free advice. I said, go buy the book. That's my free advice. Right? That's my free advice. Yeah, I was like, oh, thank you very much. I was like, no problem. Got any questions, contact me. But if you're not holding there, and you're only thinking of things like, okay, I keep the Torah, I keep mitzvahs, I learn as much as I can, this, that, I learn some Musar, some Chumash, some Jewish philosophy, okay. Okay, very good. Or some people, they want to go beyond that. Right? Now, some people, you shouldn't go, so far beyond it, but to understand at least what's going on, that's all weird. For this generation, people want a little bit more. They're not happy with the standard books out there in different things. They want to go a little bit deeper, or whatever, whatever it may be. That's okay. They want to have a basic understanding of how these things work. Now, at some point, you're going to say, well, we don't, the Ramchal there in Derech Hashem is setting up how these things work. But he's not telling you in depth. He's telling you, yeah, there are different levels of angels, and you got the heavenly courts, and you got angels doing different things. Okay. But he's not telling you exactly how, who's going where, what's doing what. He's just giving you a basic idea. Right? It's good to have a basic idea. Right? People thought I was crazy, even, teaching non-Jews is in Judaism. I said, why? I said, you don't think non-Jews are curious about how these things work? At least you get it from the right source. I'm not saying I'm the only source, but you get it from the right source. Right? To understand this, real depth. Give me real depth. Very depth, you can be real depth without this. Right? But it's not weird. It's not weird people have these questions. They're good questions. Right? They're very good questions. Yeah. At the end of the day, at the end of the day, what does the person have to do? A person has to try and understand to the best of their ability. Now, person, may have limited understanding. Okay, very good. The person will get to a certain level. Yeah, but in general, to understand these things, I'm not talking at a at a Kabbalistic level over here. Just basic things. How these things work. Why some of these things may be forbidden, or like sorcery. Got to get to the end of this chapter. I don't know when. Speak about it. Different things in sorcery, but you don't need to be on any level to get into sorcery. It's hazardous to your health, for sure. Person should never do it, that's for sure. Right? Even for a non-Jew, it's not a good idea. Right? It should be forbidden for a non-Jew also, according to the Noahide laws. Right? But in general, these things are real if you know what you're doing. You don't have to be on a high spiritual level for this. We have the Ouija board to bring up souls. These are things that are done. And people, it's all make believe, it's all this, it's all that. And not true. Definitely not true. There are many stories, many, many stories, about people who've done this. And, I'm not saying they died from it, but let's say, it didn't end well. It didn't end well with things they did. I heard stories, so listen late at night, people tell the stories how they became religious on a certain radio station here. And some of these people, yeah. They played with these things. And he said, what happened to them? Yeah, no, you can say, oh, they made it up, this and that. It's real people. Not making this stuff up. Yeah, it's Torah show. They obviously, vetted them, probably before, but, these are real stories. Ouija boards, bringing up souls, different things, and the cause and effect, right? And they made very clear, some of them made very clear what the cause and effect was. Yeah, it was dangerous, right? One tells the story that, I don't know, brought up certain souls that they shouldn't have, or whatever, caused them a lot of pain, whatever it was, and, they go home, their entire house is totally ransacked. Yeah. Now, you would expect, okay, probably somebody broke in. Probably someone broke in and ransacked the place. Okay. Any broken windows? No. Door's still locked on the outside. The window's broken, no entrance, nowhere. They checked all over, no entrance. How did anyone get in? No possible way. Right? It's according to this world. No possible way anyone could have entered. Yeah, no possible way. Everything was left the same. No possible way to get in. No breach locks, no nothing. So again, a person can say whatever they want. He said, oh, someone must have got in, they must have had a key. And then they locked the door on the way out. Maybe. Or, the back door, they, I don't know, came in through the basement, or something. Whatever it was, this person said, there's no possible way. According to nature, it's impossible. No windows open, no glass broken. The house was ransacked. Ransacked. How do you explain that? Say it's coincidence. Okay. Right? Nice, scary story. Right? It's a coincidence. But this person themselves said this was the punishment. Right? This soul said you're in trouble. You're going to be in trouble for doing this. It's like laugh, this, that, whatever. Yeah, a guy what goes home. Yeah, his whole house is like demolished on the inside. There's no possible way to get in. He opens the door, key combination, whatever it is, and he's like shocked. He goes, everything's like destroyed. Destroyed. And so he looked around. Someone had to come in somewhere. Yeah, it didn't have a fireplace. So it didn't come through the chimney. There would be, it'd probably be, I don't know, maybe it's footprints, maybe it's other thing. Nothing. Nothing. There are other stories. I'm not going to sit here and tell stories. We'll save that, for the end of the chapter. But he said that was the punishment. And he got warned. First he got warned. His whole house got demolished. You say, oh, it's a ghost story. Okay. Person was lying. Okay. There, other stories corroborated by other people. Not exactly like this, similar. Even worse. Yeah, these are forces you don't mess with. Right? You're not allowed to play with creation, but God, why did God allow it? That's a good question. Why did God allow these forces to be in the world? Don't know. He gave man the ability to tap into these things. Not that he said they should. Right? Just like in Isaiah chapter 45, verse 7, when did God create evil? Right? There are a lot of bad translations out there, but Isaiah chapter 45, 7 makes clear God created evil. Doesn't mean he's evil. He gave people the ability to tap in. Doesn't mean he's evil. Yeah, it's a problem for the Christians. That's why they mistranslate it, because all evil comes from JC. Right? Sorry, from the Sultan. From the evil inclination, whatever you want to call him. He's the one that does all evil. So good, they mistranslated. Okay. So why did God create evil? Right? The Ramchal, others say the same thing. To give man free choice. Because we're not robots. God has plenty of robots in the world, right? He's got animals, he's got plants. He's got other robots in the world. Man has free choice. Okay. So God put it out there for man to make choices. You can make good choices. You can make bad choices. He doesn't want you to tap in. Same thing. So he created these forces. He created the ability for you to have power over these forces. Now, the ability to do that seemingly is not that hard. You don't have to be on any spiritual level to do it. Yeah, all you have to do pretty much is you have to know how to say certain incantations, right, or whatever, and you can have different powers. Now, is that what God wants? No. Could it be answered to the out? Absolutely. Right? But why do you put it out there? Right? So you can ask the same thing when the children of Keturah, who was Hagar, when Abraham married her after Sarah died, right? He had a number of children with her. And Keturah what did he say? What does the Torah say? He gave them matanos. He gave them gifts. What did he give them? What did he give them? He gave them, Rashi says, Shemus Atuma. Right? Names of God from the dark side, let's say. He gave these different names to, do whatever. Sorcery, other things. And he sent them to the east. All spirituality he gave to Yitzchak. Right? But them, he gave these names of impurity, let's say. Sorcery, essentially. So it's no coincidence he sent them to the east, that means the Far East. As we understand, that's why, so much sorcery there in general. right? But the question is, why do you give them that? Why give them that of all things? So Rabbi says, Rabbi, Arav Goner Moshe later should be well. Why do you give them that? So he says, these children he had, he wanted to make sure they're never going to have anything to do with Judaism. In other words, they're not going to intermingle and be part of the Jewish people. So what did he do? He gave them these things, he sent them far away. He got rid of them. He sent them far away to do their own thing. So they're not going to join. They're not going to be part of the future Jewish people. Totally separated them. Right? They went off and did their own thing, and that's it. That's what my Rebbe says. Now, there's a question. You can ask a question, okay. He wants to separate them to make sure there's no question they will not be part of the Jewish people. So that I can understand, right? That I can understand. That I can understand. But why that? Of all things, you're going to give other things, right? Seemingly, you could give them other things. Yeah. Why specifically that? Why specifically these impure names that anyone can tap into, that anyone can use for sorcery? So he answered. So they'll have no connection whatsoever to Jewish people. And they're going to be totally separate. So it's like, here, take this $1 billion, get out of here. And so they're not going to have anything to do with the Jewish people. Okay. But he's giving them certain powers. That's what he's giving them. These certain names of God. Okay. From the dark side. Now, what does that mean? It means anybody who wants can participate. They can check in. They can totally check in if they want. What's the problem? What's the obvious problem? God doesn't want. God doesn't want you tapping into these things. Very good. If God doesn't want you to tap into it, what's he giving them for? Right? So that's the same question. Why did God create evil? Does he want people to tap into it? No. Does he want people to make mistakes? No. Does he give people the opportunity to make mistakes? Yes. But they have free will. They could choose to tap into it, choose not to tap into it. That is what we're doing here in the world. We're here busy making choices. You can make good choices. Essentially, you can make bad choices, right? That's what we're here for. And hopefully we make more, better choices than worse choices. And there's always going to be temptation, right? Always going to be temptation, whether it's by food, whether it's by doing things immorally, stealing, plenty of things. Plenty of things that a person can get tempted by, and that they get, let's say, societal pressure, other things that people get, caught up in. Okay. They get caught up in all these things. Now, does God want you to get caught up in it? No. Does environment play a role over here? Absolutely does. Right now, people have said, mistakenly, but people have said, well, you shouldn't be affected by the environment. Right? You should never be affected. Yeah, very good. You shouldn't. Torah should be the divine protection. Okay. Torah should absolutely be the divine protection. Good. Now, the pressure of society, is it real? Definitely real. Definitely real. Could someone go astray because of peer pressure? Absolutely. Person go off the rails? Absolutely. The story I read a couple weeks ago. Somebody made a lot of money, very quick, very young, and he was with some people, and they wanted to try drugs, right? So then, what do I have to lose? Like, what do I have to lose? He had money, whatever, he had a good time with them, but what happened? It made him feel good. He tried it again. And then once the high came down, he wanted to do it again. Eventually, he became addicted. What it led to, right? There are people that can be drug addicts because, how'd they get the drugs in general? They tried it. Not because of anything else. You can say they had difficult lives, they had this, they had that. Could be. Probably for the most part. People get the drugs and alcohol because of difficulty in life. Whatever the difficulty is, okay. But there are people who get into it because they tried it. Not for any other reason. I'm not saying, I would say, majority of people, get into alcohol and drugs not because they tried it. Because they're trying to numb themselves. So that makes more sense. But there are people who got caught up in this because they tried it. Right? And that's what it led to. Yeah, and that's what happened. There's peer pressure. You think there was anything wrong. You think, like, what's going to happen? What are the worst things going to happen? Yeah, you got a buzz, you get a high. Okay. That's it, but he enjoyed it. So what happened? Did it again. He did it again. It ruined his life. Totally ruined his life. Yeah, it can happen that way. Also. Someone asks, what if someone cursed a person? Now, the question is, what's the curse over here? There's a total prohibition. Person's not allowed to curse with God's name. Yeah, it's one of the 10 Commandments. Not allowed to curse with God's name. Right? What if you curse someone in the vernacular, right? You curse them, right? The question is what type of curse you're talking about. If you're talking about foul language, obviously it's bad, right? Obviously that's bad, right? But if you're cursing them in a different way, right? If you're cursing them and say, I want this person to drop dead, get hit by a bus, I want them to, lose all their money, whatever, right? So a person has to be very careful here because if that is the case, and a person says, God, take care of them, and you curse them for bad, let's say, of course, it's usually for bad, then what's going to happen? God is going to open your file. And God's going to say, oh, you want me to curse them? You want me to do something against them? Well, who are you? Like, why? Why should I do that? Why should I cause them pain? Why should I cause them difficulty? But God has to look into it. Right? This whole thing of an evil eye. Why does God have to look into it? Because a person's in pain. A person is calling out in pain. God doesn't like to see his creation in pain. So what does the person say? This person crying out in pain says this person did this, that, and the other thing. And you want God to punish them. Yeah. Now God has to take it seriously. He's got to look into it. Now, if the person actually did something wrong or whatever, God will deal with them. If the the issue over here is like this. We've spoken about this, a lot in the book of Leviticus, chapter 2, Mishnah 16, about the evil eye. We'll just say one thing. That, if someone is jealous of someone else, for whatever reason, let's say somebody is building, in addition to their house. They're not doing it, they're not ostentatious per se. They're building an addition because they need the space. Yeah. So the other person's jealous. Now, why is the other person jealous? The other person is jealous for one simple reason: they can't build, or they don't have money. They're not necessarily doing it in an ostentatious way. They need the space. So now that person who says, they feel bad about what this other person's doing, God's going to open their file first. Now, the obvious question is why? Why is God going to, again, Reuven has a shame against Shimon. Reuven's claim is Shimon's building this house. He feels bad because he can't build. Or he feels bad because he doesn't have money to build or whatever. Right? Shimon's building because he needs the space. So God at this point looks into Reuven and, all right, let's see where he's holding. Let's see what he's doing. Why are you looking at a Reuven? Why look at a Reuven? Look at a Shimon. Look what Shimon did over it. He did it for the right reason. Did he do it for the sake of heaven? Did he do it for the sake of being ostentatious? That's the question. Why did he do it? That would make more sense. But over here, you're looking at Reuven because Reuven's making a claim. Reuven's making a claim, right? It's like two kids are fighting, or one kid says, he's bothering me. Now, what would a parent do? Right? This kid smacked the other kid. So he said, "Why'd you smack him?" He said, "He was bothering me." Now, it doesn't give him right to smack him, right? Well, then the parent looks at the other kid and says, "Were you bothering him?" Right? That's the norm. You're going to ask, now, obviously, kid doesn't have a right to smack the other kid. Okay. But you have to get to see what happened. Did the other kid deserve it or not? Right? You got to put in your own child, say, you know how to smack, whatever. But did the other kid do anything? That's what you would normally say. You got to go to the horse's mouth. Did you do anything or you didn't do anything? That's the question. Right? That is the question. This is the opposite. Whatever Shimon did, at this point, it doesn't matter. Reuben gets called to court. Right? What do you mean Reuben gets called to court? Right? Reuben's making a complaint. The question is, why is he making the complaint? You'll say he's hurt. He's upset. For whatever reason. He's making the complaint. So God's going to say, okay, he's making the complaint. He's the one who's really making the complaint. Who says he's innocent? Maybe Reuben over there isn't so innocent. Let's see. Let's open up his file and see where he's holding. Before we get to Shimon, where's Reuben holding? Over here. Right? Is his claim legit? Or is he just complaining for no reason? Right? There's a story, a certain place where people, a lot of places here in Israel, people build extensions to their home, to their apartments. Right? Now, sometimes they will not build with permission of the municipality. Now, why do you need permission of the municipality? In general, make sure you're not destroying the building, the structure. They want to give their okay after they checked it. Right? Now, what's the issue? Now, the issue is that it takes a long time to get a permit. And the second issue is it costs a lot of money. Right? It's not cheap to get a permit. So what will some people do? I'm not going to say everybody, but what will some people do? They'll start building. Right? They will start building without a permit because the idea is, I don't think it's changed that much, the idea is even if they get caught, the fine they're going to get is going to be less than if they got the original permit. Right? That's the mentality. The fine is going to be greater, so okay, I'll take my chance. I know of a certain place where just about everybody who built, somebody ratted on them to the municipality that they built without a permit. Now, why is this a problem? It's a problem because someone who's a rat, we call in biblical Hebrew and really rabbinic literature a moser. A moser is somebody who turns another Jew to secular authorities, either secular Jewish authorities or secular non-Jewish authorities for no reason. Right? These type of people in the Jewish community we consider the most despised. Most despised people. You couldn't trust them. They caused a lot of damage. A lot of damage. But it goes further than that. Right? The Gemara says very clear, a moser in general, unless the person's absolute mazik, he's causing damage, then you can turn him in. Then you're allowed to turn him in because he's causing damage. That's a different issue. Right? But if someone is going to, squeal to the authorities based on nothing, which is a horrific thing, right? A totally horrific thing to do. The punishment for such a person is ein lo chelek olam haba. They lose their portion of the world to come. That's how severe it is. So I asked someone in a certain neighborhood that, a lot of people got squealed on. I said, but don't they know? If they squeal, they're going to lose their portion of the world to come. So I said, why would someone do that? I'm talking about religious people here. Why would somebody do it? If someone told you, I'll tell you simply. If I can't build for whatever reason, why should I allow you to build? I said to the extent you're willing to lose your portion of the world to come, and if you don't, and if you don't, and if you don't, if you don't, if you don't repent, and get acceptance, get atonement from the person you did it against, you lose your portion of the world to come. I think everyone agrees that's bad, right? That for sure is bad. Yeah. So I asked him. So I asked this person. I said, "Why would someone do it? What's the rationale that someone would do it, and that they would lose their portion of the world to come?" So he told me straight out. He said, "If I can't build for whatever reason, you're also not going to be allowed to build." Now, what does that tell you? That's jealousy. Now, if the person's building something, let's say ostentatious, and they're spending all kinds of money making a whole fancy thing, that I could hear would be an issue with them. And God's going to call that out. Because it's going to make people jealous. Okay. But in this case, the scenario was flipped, right? We flipped the script over here. And we're going to say, well, I can't build for whatever reason, so I'm not going to let you build. Isn't that being petty? You might be angry. Maybe the person blew the money. Maybe they're supposed to get the money and they didn't, or they just don't have the money. Let's say they don't have the money. Okay. So they're going to squeal on someone else for the sole reason that they themselves can't build based on jealousy. And they're willing to give up in the world to come. That's what I told this brother. I said, that makes sense. He goes, yep. He goes, that's the story. He said, that is the mentality. I said, that's pathetic. He said, yeah. But again, the saving grace is it's kind of funny if you think about it. And that is, even if they get squealed on, the amount they have to pay in the fine is not compared to what they would have to get in the permits. Okay, so say, let someone squeal to be worth it. Okay. At the expense of losing their portion of the world to come. It's mind-boggling. Right? Mind-boggling. But someone who does such a thing, again, we're not talking about a case. We're not talking about a case where, the person's an absolute menace or doing things seriously wrong. That you don't have to ask the rabbi what to do. You turn him in because the person's a menace and the person's causing damage. You turn him in. But here we're talking about a case where someone's going to turn someone in for no good reason, just to make their lives a misery. It's the only reason. These people, again, throughout history, were considered the most despised, despicable people there were. Right? They walk down the street, you walk the other way. Like, you don't have anything to do with these people. You look at them the wrong way, who knows what they could do? Who knows the damage they could cause? You stay away from them. You try to stay away from them. Yeah, but again, if it's something where there's damage and they're causing damage, that's a different issue. That for sure you're allowed to do. Right? Now, if you could turn them in yourself, you do it. You yourself could do it. Yeah, but to call the authorities, not a problem. Right? In that case, it wouldn't be a problem. But, in a lot of cases, in history, you had people that did that and they had no leg to stand on whatsoever. They did it because they didn't like the person. They did it for who knows what reason. Certainly wasn't altruistic. Yeah. They're turning them in to save others from whatever. It's not true. They turn them in for no reason. Yeah. So that it's very hard, it's very hard in a certain way. A person can be stubborn and angry and jealous, I don't know, whatever it may be. But to the extent that you're willing to lose your portion of the world to come, that's hard to say. right? That's that's beyond, because that level of jealousy can take you out of this world. Yeah, literally, it'll take you out of this world. Obviously, it's not what God wants, but can it lead to that? It could lead to a person getting angry. Who knows what a person can do, right? Depends on the level of anger, right? Person's not in control, right? The Gemara in Sanhedrin says, they could be hovering over the gates of hell and hear all kinds of things that don't change. Why? Because they're angry, right? It's brought down that someone is angry. You don't try and reason with them until they calm down, right? It's impossible to reason with someone who's angry. But again, someone in this case, what happened? They can't build, right? So if I can't build, I'm not going to let you build. That's pathetic. I understand. They're angry, they're jealous, you fill in the blanks. Okay. But with all that, you're willing to sacrifice, a portion of the world to go? Go with some people say, yeah, it's worth it. Right? It's worth it. Why? Because they don't care. Because the fact is, they're angry. Yeah. And when a person's angry, who knows what a person will do? Right? So, so again, comes on Lord Chaim HaKadosh over here, right? And he says, and he's talking about the rewards. The reward if you do something by anger, but by fear, right? Where that you get, let's say, a portion of the world to come. But out of love, out of joy, you can even get part of the mitzvah in this world. Part of the rewards of the mitzvah in this world. Now, somebody going out of fear, I think, is easier. Right? Why is it easier? Because fear itself stops a person sometimes from doing things they shouldn't do. Right? That I can understand. They don't want to get punished, so it's a deterrent. Or it could be a deterrent. Now, why is love harder? Right? We mentioned before, what's the root of the word love? Aleph Hey Beis, or Hey Beis, right? In Hebrew. What does Hav mean in Aramaic? To give. You want to love, you got to give. Anything you want to love, you have to give of yourself. So you say, well, why is that so hard? Of course. You come to, faith and belief in God, so to speak. You go into the right path, right? Everything's good, so to speak. Should be easy to serve God in that sense, right? What's the detraction here? What's the hardship, right? Where's the pressure point? The pressure point obviously is when he gets slapped upside the head, whatever it is. You get stopped dead in the tracks. Something happens. It makes you question. And people have this question all the time, right? All the time, right? There's a question, the question of a person, let's say, whatever difficulty is, right? Whatever difficulty is, person has hardship, and a person gives up hope. Person feels there's no hope. And a person will say, I tried, I work hard, right? I work hard, I do different things, and I still get slammed all over the place. So it must be my prayers maybe not worth very much. Prayers can be worth a lot. God doesn't want to see a person give up. It's easy to give up. We go through all kinds of hardship. Person, can easily give up. Plenty of things. Right? But at the end of the day, what happens? It's hardship. What happens when there's hardship? What do we think? We think what I do doesn't matter. We think, I'm trying so many different things. I'm working on, not speaking Lashon Hara. I'm working on, being careful what I see. I'm working on, all these different things, which is all good. Joy has a positive effect. What will someone say, obviously? But I'm not having the desired effect. What's the desired effect? Whatever I want. Whatever this thing is that I need, whether it's health, livelihood, or whatever it is. Obviously, I'm not getting what I want. Right? So I'll throw this out there. Let's say you're not getting what you want. Right? Let's say. Right? I'll give an example that happened to me today. Right? So on the way to go learn this morning, I was waiting for a bus by the bus stop. In Jerusalem, there's an ambulance. And all of a sudden, you hear a second ambulance comes right in front of the bus stop. I'm like, it's like never happened. Like, what do you have two ambulances here for? You got one ambulance that was thinner, one obviously much longer. So you see someone get out of the second ambulance, open up the back of the first ambulance, say hello to whoever's there, and they take someone out from the back of the first ambulance, put them in the second ambulance. Now, this is a much older person, right? On a stretcher. Let's say on a bed or a stretcher, whatever it was. Yeah, on oxygen. Obviously, trouble breathing. I don't have that. Heart attack, didn't have heart attack, whatever it was. So here, they take him into the bigger van, obviously on the way to the hospital. So they get him out of the what's it called? Out of the ambulance. They, and you have someone carrying the oxygen tank. Someone carrying the oxygen tank. The person on oxygen, they put him in the other ambulance. Right? Whatever. Number of minutes later, right, they go on their way. Right? They go on their way, or whatever. Let's say 10 minutes later, 15 minutes later, whatever it was. They go on their way. Now you see something like that. You could have the worst day. You can have all kinds of things going wrong, all things that, plenty of things going on wrong, let's say in your life. And let's say there are a lot of terrible things going on, a lot of bad things. Okay. A lot of hard things. Okay. Now what happens when you see something like that? You can say, okay, the person's much older, this and that. But it makes you think. The person can't breathe. Right? They're having difficulty breathing. They're in an oxygen tank. Clear sign. Right? They're on a stretcher and, go in another ambulance. That's a clear sign. They go to the hospital. Very good. I don't know. A person should have a foolish language. Should have a speedy recovery. So you can take it a number of different ways. You can say, okay, the person's much older. You don't know the person, let's say, so it doesn't affect you. You move on. Life moves on. Doesn't affect you. But I would venture to guess on a person's worst day, whatever that worst day looks like, person's worst day, you see something like that, should make you think. What should it make you think? Well, I don't have that. Not in the back of an ambulance. God forbid, poo, poo, poo. You're not gasping for air. Not like you can't move, you're incapacitated. They say, but you're still going through your own personal difficulties. Okay. Those difficulties in that split second, they go away, they ain't go away. Those difficulties are still there. Very much alive and kicking. Good. You look at that person, I'm not going to say your difficulties pass away and they dissipate. No. But when a person sees something like that, what does it do? It should make you think. What should it make you think of? Well, I don't have this. This is a lot worse. Yeah, maybe, or maybe not. Right? Or, you hear someone like, screaming, like at the top of their lungs, and you can tell that they're not normal. And they have issues. They're kind of annoying. Okay. But you hear that, they're like 25-year-old, and they had body of a 5-year-old. Carrying on and this and that and whatever. Which also make a person think. Yeah, maybe for a split second. Then you go back to worrying about what you have to worry about. But you don't think about these things. How many people think about these things? Right? See a blind person. Someone, blind person with a dog or with a walker, or with a stick or whatever. They don't think about the ability they have to see. Whether they can see better or see, no, they're not blind. So we're not blind. Does that get a person to think? So we mentioned many times, Vilna Gaon sent students on Friday to visit people in the hospital before Shabbos. They were suffering from abject poverty. Some people in pain. People couldn't take care of their needs. They went into Shabbos very different. Very, very different. Now, does that mean they had more food on Shabbos? No. Were they still suffering from poverty? Yeah. But they saw life from a different perspective. Right? A very different perspective. What was a very different perspective? They're not in pain. They're not suffering in that sense. Right? So at the end of the day, what happens? They look at it a different way. They should look at it a different way. Now, does it mean it disappears? No. Does not mean, it disappears, but it gives you a different perspective on things. Because that particular thing you don't have. You're not mentally challenged. You're not physically challenged. I would say you are, but not to that extent. Everyone's got, some sort of aches and pains here and there, depending. It's not totally free from it, but let's say you have minimal aches and pains where you don't have any. Okay. Do you take that for granted? Anyone's going to take that for granted. Oh, all you need is a person to trip and fall, break your arm, break your leg. Whatever it may be. You got to be careful with what, older people always worry about falling. 100%. Because you're much more brittle. Bones are much more brittle. You fall, you break, who knows how many bones. Take you forever to recover. People are afraid of that. Okay. But the people think about health. No. They don't have health problems, they don't think about it. Right? So now you can have someone with no health problems, but other issues. You can have family issues. You can have livelihood issues. You can have both issues. Who knows? You can have all kinds of issues. Family issues, kids issues, whatever. You can have a lot of different things. But you don't care about the things you don't have. Nobody cares about the things they don't have in general. So, oh, that's so sad. That's this. That's that. You're right. But you don't think about it too much. Why? It doesn't affect you. Why doesn't it affect you? Because you yourself aren't going through it. You're not suffering through it. If you suffer through it, that's a different issue. Then it hits more to the heart. Right? That'll hit you right in the heart. But that's if you're going through it. If you're on the outside watching it, you say, wow, I'm sad. Whatever. But then life goes on. Now, there's nothing that happens by coincidence. Nothing. Right? So now, something like this happens. You see it with your own eyes. It should have an effect. Should make a person stop and think. But what's the difficulty? What's the difficulty? Why does it get blown off, so to speak? Because you're going through other things. And when you're going through other things, you don't think about these things. Because these other things, you're getting slapped up the side of the head for other things. And not this. So it doesn't resonate. Totally doesn't resonate. But, as we always say, it's wake-up call. It's to remember, guess what? It could be worse. You could go through this. I remember once, whatever, sitting on a bus and mentioned the story before, that someone was, mentally challenged getting off the bus. I mean, like, really needed help getting off the bus. Was, let's say young adult. I would go through all the details, so to speak, and he had a lot of things wrong, right? Physically and mentally. No, like, there's no question. So I'm watching this whole event. Yeah, it took, a little bit of time, for the person to get off the bus and everything else, and walking very slowly, blah, blah, blah. Okay. Right? The door closes, the bus goes on. I looked up to heaven, I said, okay, I got the message. I got the message. Yeah. So someone, whatever, last week. Last week on a bus. This woman gets off the bus. I couldn't tell if she's 100% all there or not. So it seemed like it was certain issues. And she's getting off the bus, and like she can barely walk. You know, people were watching because it's taking this woman forever to get off the bus. Like one step. And it wasn't old. One step, another step, a third step, you're looking at your watch, like, how long is this gonna take? Yeah. And you're watching, finally like gets to the door, gingerly like walks off the bus. It could be, I don't know, back problem, leg problem, whatever it is. And finally, whatever, get off the bus. The person, whatever, gets off the bus. You see, like they're walking very gingerly. Very, very gingerly. Yeah, and the bus goes. People just like go back to their own thing. They don't, if you dwell on it too much, yeah, you'll tell me you get depressed. Yeah, you see people that, struggle physically, mentally, whatever, but let's say you see it. What do people do? They go back to the phones. Go back to scrolling, whatever. When the bus gonna move, people are impatient, different things. They don't think. They don't think about it. It's a part of life. Okay, this person has this. Okay. But again, does that affect them? They say, wow, I don't have that problem. I can walk without any issue. I can go like this, no arthritis, beautiful. Right? I can go like this, woo, both hands, nothing hurts, yeah? Do we think about it? No. When it hurts, you think about it. Yeah. That's what you think about these things. You're going to say it shouldn't get to the point where it hurts that you have to think about it. True. But there are a lot of things. There are a lot of things that we take for granted. Literally, we take for granted. And we take it for granted when we don't have them. That's when we take them for granted. Yeah, that's what it is. It should never come to that, but we're doing our own thing. We're worrying. We're worrying about things that we need to worry about. Whatever they may be. They could be, could be health issues the person's worried about. Could be livelihood issues. Could be family. It could be many things. But each person, they'll be selfish in their own way. Not really selfish, but they're thinking about what they are going through. Because essentially, they don't care what other people are going through in general. Whether it's a loved one or they're suffering or whatever. But like, in general, you don't think about these things. They don't affect us. But if you see it enough times, a person could be like totally down, feel like they're out for the count, all kinds of hardship and difficulty. Woe to me this, woe to me that. Yeah, and then imagine, like, you're outside, you see a blind person. Does that change a person's perspective? Maybe a little bit. You say, oh, that's terrible, whatever. But at the end of the day, for they themselves, what are they going to be thinking about? They're thinking about what they themselves are going through. Right? My life comes first. Not worried about what someone else goes through, per se. Not worried about that. Maybe they have to be. Someone else tells them about it. Whatever. Okay, but right. And generally, you're worried about your own thing. You don't have time to worry about someone else's thing. Right? We are busy chasing our tails on a daily basis. Right? So that's all true. That's all true, but what we see should affect us. Should give us perspective. And the perspective is, okay, if you have this going on for you, that's good. You should be thankful. You should be thankful you don't have these other things. And it makes sense. Because you don't want them. Then what happens when you get them? Okay. So you'll say, I'll deal with it when it happens. Good. But nobody wants them. It shouldn't be that a person's only thankful when and they forget the goodness they have until it happens. Take a lot of things for granted. Many, many things for granted. It shouldn't be that way. Gotta take the bull by the horns. Gotta enjoy everything now. Everything I see, sun out, it's let's say it's sunny out, it's warm. Thankful for the heat. Thankful for what the heat does. Thankful for what the rain does. Thankful for what the snow does, right? There's purpose. There's purpose in all. There's nothing that happens by accident. There's nothing that's random. Yeah, that's a purpose. Now we see these type of things, it should affect us. Right? A person can say, oh, my life is terrible, right? Because oh, my prayers are worthless. Prayers are never worthless. God may not answer them. They're not worthless. We have no idea where they're going to help in the future. What possibly they could do. Prayer is very powerful. We say, I'm going through hardship. Okay. Right? So this is just the opposite. If a person's going through hardship and says, well, God's not answering my prayers, so what's the answer? You pray. You never give up. You say, well, God may never answer my prayer. Maybe. Maybe he'll say no. Could be. Could very well be. Maybe he'll say no. But what do? You give up? You give up or you keep fighting? Or you can give up. It's very easy to give up. Yeah. If the person will say, I don't have time, I don't have the patience for this anymore. It's too hard. So can a person pray God should take away whatever challenges? Yes. Right? But a person, remember, it could be the suffering is helping them tremendously. What's hard? We don't want to suffer. Right? Anyone enjoy getting a root canal? Probably not. Why do you get a root canal? Save your tooth. Okay? Better than pulling the tooth. Yeah, maybe you have to pull the tooth. Okay. But at the end of the day, what happens? You're happy you only had a root canal. Regardless of what it costs you. You're happy you saved the tooth. It's going to cause you pain. But through the pain, you're going to get healed. Same thing. You have to take bitter medicine. Well, if you don't take the bitter medicine, you won't get better. And let's say the medicine will actually help you. Right? So you tell me, I don't want to take the bitter medicine. Right? It makes me almost want to gag. Okay. That's going to help you. Right? It's going to get you better. Person, God forbid, has to have an operation. Yeah? They have to have an operation. It's going to be painful. Right? Recovery is going to be X, Y, and Z. Right? But if you don't do the surgery, what's going to happen? You'll be in more pain. And let's say, again, surgery works. It's going to take care of the problem. Right? Will be, very easy over here. Okay, you might have to go through rehabilitation. You might have to go through other things. Very good. But it's going to help you. I might be out of commission for a while. Okay. But in the end, you're going to get back what you need. You're going to get to what you need. So is it worth it? Of course it's worth it. You can say, but rehabilitation, it's going to be hard. You're right. It may be hard. Person may be out of commission for a while. Good. So they'll be out of commission. But guess what? If you didn't do it, what's going to happen? It'll be worse. Be a lot worse. So again, is it worth it? So a person will say, I'd rather not have to go through it. Okay. Now, there are certain things you wouldn't elect to do surgery. Good. Let's say all things being equal. Elective surgery, I want to agree you have to have surgery. Okay. So it's going to take time. It's going to take time. And someone tripped, I don't know, really strained their ankle or they didn't really break their foot, but it did a lot of damage. It kept them, what do you call it? It kept them, off their feet for a while. Right? They couldn't go out. Couldn't go out for a long time. For weeks. They were in a boot and whatever. So it happened. That happened, but they were totally out of commission. Okay. So what happened? So in the end, it got a little bit easier. Then it got a little bit easier. They didn't have to have surgery, right? But it was painful, right? So they did what they needed to do, and then they had to go through physiotherapy and all that. But it worked itself out. Was it inconvenient? Oh, it was inconvenient. 100% was inconvenient. But at the end of the day, it healed, even though it took time. But they understood that. So, we deal with all kinds of different realities. So you say, well, that's the reality. Right? Now, that's going to be a reality for a long time. It took 6 weeks, took 2 months, took more. I forget what it was, 2-3 months, I think, before they finally, even to put any pressure, on their foot. So they'd be wheeled around. Could not put any pressure on their foot. It happens. Now imagine if they had to have surgery. Okay. Well, there's a benefit. I mean, hopefully there's a benefit. It's going to fix you up. Good. There's rehabilitation. Okay. Well, let's say, you're not going to do that. So another question is pain control. If someone like that's got, problem with their back, they're not going to get surgery. They're much older, and surgery may not help. And it's going to be painful. It's going to be extremely painful. So they're electing to try to do other things. Sometimes it's better, sometimes it's not. But that's it. They're going to live with it. They're definitely going to live with it. Now, wouldn't they like a magic pill, take it all away? Sure. It's going away? It ain't going away. I tried acupuncture, try other things. They get cortisone shots. It's sometimes better, sometimes not. Yeah, I got good days and bad days. Okay. Well, that's the wear and tear on the body. That's what it is. Are they thankful when it's less painful? Yes. Would they hope it would totally disappear? Yeah, but they're realistic. It's not gonna, they're not opting for surgery. And it makes sense. You're much older, you're not gonna do surgery. It's not worth it. Very good. Okay. But those days where it doesn't hurt so much, aren't they thankful? Oh, yeah. For probably 20 years before, or 15 years before, even 10 years before, they never had this problem. Did they ever think about it? No. They ever think about it, anything to do with their body that they have problems with? Never. Why would people think about it? Body works for the most part. No one's going to think about it. It makes sense, but, why is the person going to take things for granted until they don't have it? And that's with anything. What do people pray for to have a lot of money? What do they pray for? They don't necessarily pray, but what do they go? What's their goal? Right? Unless they're going to give it all away at some point, their goal is to preserve it and to make more money. So Mishnah Pirkei Avos says, right? It says in Ethics, my father spoke about it. It says, Harbi nechosim, harbi daigo. When a person has a lot of property, in general, what increases worry? What's the worry? Am I going to keep it? Right? Am I going to keep it intact? How am I going to grow it? They're always worried. They don't want to lose. They don't want to even lose a small part of it. They always want to keep it intact. Very good. So they're always worried. So what happens when someone's always worried and they're paranoid, let's say? You can't enjoy it. And if you have a lot of it, doesn't matter. You're never really going to enjoy it because you're paranoid about it. You always say how much is there, and it goes up, it goes down, it's this. Imagine you put all this money in the stock market, have a heart attack. certain things go up, or certain things go down. You put money in the stock. Stockbrokers, leave money in this or whatever, and the whole thing goes. Can happen. Playing Russian roulette in a certain way. Right? But a person has money, they want it to make more money, for sure. They want to increase it. They don't want to lose it. Right? For sure not. Well, what does it do? Doesn't give them any menuchas and nefesh. Doesn't give them any equilibrium over here. They're always worried. They're always worried. It's not going to be good. Once the person's always worried, you have no rest. You have no rest over here. Yeah, that makes sense. Right? Yeah, you can go on nice vacations, this and that, but you're still worried. You're still 100% worried. You're multi-billionaire. So good, so. I'll probably give a lot of it away. How have I? Like, they give it to the right places. Okay. They're not interested, in losing. Okay, they'll take losses. They'll take losses. But at the end of the day, do they want to lose? No. They want to increase. They're going to make even more money. Good. What are you going to do with it? In 10 lifetimes, you can never use it. So you do have people that, have so much money, they'll give it all away. Or most of it away. Or whatever. Okay. So we said, how have I? They give it to the right place. How have I? It goes to the right place. But at the end of the day, you have to know where it goes. You know what to do with it. Right? So even with that, they have any other issues? Maybe you say, well, they got plenty of money, so they got no other issues. I doubt that. Could have an issue with their spouse, could have an issue with their kids, could have an issue with all kinds of things. But okay, they got money. You can numb yourself with money, buy this, buy that, doesn't mean anything. Has no meaning. That's way past time. But they'll also have issues. No one gets away, scot-free. So you pick your poison, whatever it is. Whatever you have. That's what God wanted you to have. The trial in this thing. But it can be multiple trials in the same thing. Person, health issues. Yeah, with health issues comes what? Pain. So I got to deal with pain. Or they're going to complain. Or they're going to be, yell and scream. They're going to have a short fuse. Or they're going to, can't function properly when you're in pain. But there are other character traits involved in everything we do. Livelihood. Good example. Money comes in, it doesn't come in, it's supposed to come in, you're waiting, this, that, right? So you got to work on what? Patience. You got to work on putting your best foot forward either way. Good. I don't necessarily see the end result. Maybe it takes longer, things to come in and whatever, and all these things. Could be. But there are multiple layers here. Multiple layers. In one trial. It could be many different things the person has to work on. Patience, anger, maybe being conceited because, they're doing very well, let's say. Many things, a part of tests. Not just one thing. Not I'm just getting hit with this. No. Because what happens? The person puts their best foot forward, right? Livelihood's a good example. Person puts their best foot forward. Spoken about this before, but I'll mention it here in passing. And they don't succeed. And they have difficulty, right? Maybe other people around them also having difficulty, so they're all in the same boat. Okay. But how do we measure success? We measure success, unfortunately, by what a person has. What a person makes. How much they have in the bank. And that people want to hear. They want to hear what these people have to say if they have money, this and that. Who cares what they have to say? Some of the rabbinical scholars, they don't have money. They'll listen to what they have to say. Okay. Someone who's got money, what do I care what they have to say? Unless they have something good to say. Bala Mea, Bala Day. You have 100 people want to hear what you have to say. Right? EF Hutton, right? Everyone wants to hear what you have to say. Who cares? Care, basketball players making $20 million a year, $30 million a year, and come on and says, the earth is flat. Flat earth theory. Throws that out there. I really care what he has to say. Come on. You can't already play basketball. Okay, maybe. I care what his philosophy is in the world. Yeah, I think the world is flat. Oh, did you ever see the world in general? Like from space? It doesn't look flat. Go to the end of this ocean, see what happens. Do you fall overboard? No. It's not flat. People are gonna, hear what this person has to say because he's got money, he's got fame, whatever. Yeah. So you can have that and have no life. For sure, have no life. Doesn't matter. Right? What's important here? What's important is what I do. What's important also to a certain extent is what I think. Because I can change my own reality by what I think. But we're always saying, but I need this, I need that, I need the other thing. Okay. Does God know better? He doesn't. He knows better. So why is he putting me through this? I don't know. Maybe he's working on my anger. Maybe. Maybe he's working on my patience. Maybe. Maybe maybe he's working on the fact that, okay, this is your trial. Right? And many people have had this trial for years. For years. But guess what? They know the trial of health. Yeah, for the most part. Maybe they list trials with other things. Well, this is the main trial. So they always say someone who doesn't have a lot and they struggle, are they going to be thankful for what they have? But see, this is the point because people will say I'm worthless and I'm not worth anything because I can't produce. Because I don't make a lot of money. And that's a mistake. Because maybe society, that's the way society judges it. Well, society, will judge what you do, how you do it, this, that. But what's the main thing? You meet someone for the first time, two questions you're going to ask them. Where are they from and what do they do? Now, you're not going to be obnoxious and say, well, how much do you make? No one's going to ask that question, but you're going to think in your mind. Oh, he does this, he must make this, that, and the other thing. That's what they're going to think. Nobody's thinking unless maybe, you're good actors or former conservative rabbi. No one's going to think as a rabbi you're making tons of money. No one's going to think that. I mean, if they do, then they're dreaming, right? But no one's going to think that. They're going to think, oh, they're helping people. They might have some knowledge, hopefully. They're giving to others, whatever, right? But they're not judging, a person like that by the bank account necessarily. Why? Because they know they don't have a lot. If that's what they're doing. Most people have more than one job because, being a rabbi, even if a synagogue doesn't pay, right? Usually doesn't pay. I know someone, bless a very big rabbinic scholar. And he said, he was charged kosher's different things. And that was the main job. Worked as a rabbi of the synagogue. And he said, I'm vastly underpaid. Right? And it was true. He told me how much he made. I wasn't trying to guess either, but in general, that's usually true. They're underpaid. Yeah, and they do a tremendous amount of things. As part of that job, even though they're grossly underpaid. Yeah, just like teachers in school, same thing. They have unbelievable responsibility. But they have to do other things to make, try and make ends meet. They have to marry kids, that's a whole other thing. Right? But in general, certain professions are not gonna judge by a bank account, per se. Because they know. You'd be judged on other things, maybe. Right? But this is a big misnomer over here. Right? And and if people struggle, that's normal. Because you got to remember who's the one in charge. God's in charge. Spoke about this last night in Pirkei Avos. God's the one in charge over here. Right? They have to remember that God's putting through giving you this trial. But at the same time, what's God doing? What does he want? He wants you to pray. It's two things. You got to pray as well. Right? Even if life is hard, you go through hardship. Okay. Right? That's all true. But a person to feel like worthless, because they struggle with it. It's normal. It's normal people have ups and downs, right? It's even more normal if you go into a recession. Yeah, how can anyone expect otherwise? It's a recession, right? But a person, can always be so proud and say, but, it was never like this. Okay, right? But that doesn't define who we are. What defines who we are? What defines who we are is what we do. What defines who we are is how we interact with others. What defines who we are is working on bad character traits. That is what defines us. This other stuff doesn't matter. It's all external, right? We always say, you see people dress up for the sake of money. Why do they dress up? Why do they wear a three-piece suit if you work on Wall Street, whether you do today or not, I don't know. Double-breasted suit, single-breasted suit. Why? For money. Because what's the first thing you do when you get home? You turn on the TV set or you change your clothes so they don't get dirty. I told somebody this once, I said some people doing it for money. Because they certainly ain't doing it because that's the way they want to dress. Someone said, well, what's the reason why you dress that way? I said, because that's God's uniform. He wants me to dress that way. But everyone else is dressing up for money. That's what their job tells them to do. So more formal, less formal. Well, this person didn't like that answer. They didn't like that answer. Is it true or not true? Right? When there's a certain job, they say, this is what you have to wear. This type of suit, that type of suit, whatever. More formal, less formal, doesn't matter. This is what you have to wear. Yeah, why do you have to wear it? Because that's the uniform. You want to get paid? That's what you do. Okay. Right? But, in high finance, you dress to kill. You're not dressing casual. You're dressing in suits. That's the way it is. But why are you dressing that way? Because that's your job. That's what you're getting paid to do. But that's not who you are. The way you dress is the way who you are. Inside your bank account is also not who you are. It can be people blessed with a lot of money, and they ain't getting nothing in the next one. They get wiped off the face of the map in the next one. That isn't guarantee. Right? So what's it worth? You say, but I want to make ends meet. Good. Everyone wants to make ends meet. Right? That's the goal. If you have extra, good. You can help others, good. Right? But it doesn't define who we are. See, this is the problem. That person gets all depressed and they get flustered. Yeah, it makes sense. A person just made, $2,000, $3,000. They got $6,000 worth of bills. What do you do? What do you pay? Whoever screams the loudest. Like, what do you do? So you got to figure out a plan what to do. Yeah, whatever it's going to be. But again, however much a person makes and whatever in their bank account does not define who they are. Right? That's the bottom line. Does not define who we are. And we get carried away and believe this stuff, this garbage, because that's what society says. That's who you are. You are defined by what you do and by how much money you make. And that's a crock. That's a total crock. Right? Brothers say, even if you make a lot of money, but you have so many kids and this and that. Also a problem. You'd have a lot more money left over and this and that. You can do what you want, but now you have so many kids. But what's the definition here? What do you take with you when you leave this world? You don't take anything. Even according to the Chinese or Japanese, they give them like plastic credit cards or cards, put them in their grave so they can use them in the next world. Good luck. What do you take with you? Nothing. Except what you did in this world. Except your deeds in this world. It's the only thing you take. You don't take anything else. And that's the most important thing. What am I here for? What do I want to be remembered for? Like, tell a story, a very pathetic story. I've told the story before. I went to a mourner's house once, and someone comes in, and whatever, it's the guy that died. And so this guy goes up to his wife, Jewish, and says, "Oh, I remember your husband buy all the smorgasbords and all the shrimp and all this." And it's like, oh, I probably shouldn't be saying this. Can you imagine what that soul's now going through? That soul's like hanging around the house before it gets judged. It's like the worst thing you could say. That's the praise you want to be remembered for all the garbage you will put in your body. Right? All the shrimp and all the, all the trait that you put in your body as a Jew. That's what you're praising him for? I can't imagine what the pain. The little I understand what the soul goes through after they die, I can't imagine what the pain of that soul is at that point. I can't imagine. Cannot imagine. But that's not what you've been said. You want to be remembered for good things that you did. You help people. I don't know. That's what you're supposed to speak about in a mourner's house. The good character traits of the person, good stories, what the person did. Not the garbage that they ate. Not the other things that they did that don't matter. Oh, remember all the sports games he went to. Remember, he went to the Super Bowl. That's what you're going to remember him for. You're going to remember for, stupid things that they did. In God's eyes. In the eyes of the Torah. That's the praise. That soul is going out of its mind at that point. Totally out of its mind. Imagine God says, I'm going to keep you around here a little bit before I judge you. I want you to hear the eulogy. I want to hear what people are going to say about you. So, can you imagine? Can you imagine? The pain it's going to suffer because it knows the truth. Imagine, someone I know helped raise $100 million for a non-Jewish charity, right? It wasn't all their money. It was whatever, other people, whatever. Imagine they get eulogized for, all the philanthropic things they did. And they mentioned this. They helped raise $100 million. I was like, wow, it is impressive, to a certain extent. You probably get some credit for it. But imagine what $100 million could have done in the Jewish community. This is a Jewish person. They gave some money to Jewish things, I'm sure. Right? I don't know if they matter or not, but whatever. Imagine, rabbinic scholars they could have had. They could have helped. Schools they could have helped. Girls' schools, widows, orphans, many things. That money could have gone to. And it went to a non-Jewish charity. Now, let's say they get credit for giving to that non-Jewish charity. Okay. Well, of course, they could have given it. So I can only imagine when they're eulogizing this person at the funeral, what the soul is going through. Because now the soul understands there's a world of truth. And when they see the world of truth, and they know what they're being praised for is a lie, essentially, or it's not good, let's say better, forget a lie, it's not good. Yeah, for them, for what they've done, what they could have done. I can't imagine, as I said before, cannot imagine the pain that it goes through. Can't imagine. Yeah, because now it knows absolute truth. And once it knows absolute truth, unless they get some sort of atonement or whatever. Yeah, somebody asked, how do you understand Job towards God gave and God take it away? Did Job complain? Job doesn't complain. His friends try and convince him different things, why things might have happened to him. Maybe blasphemy, maybe this, maybe his own bad luck, right? Job took it in stride, right? But what was the test? The test was the Satan, the evil inclination, whatever you want to call him. God says, look at my servant Job. He says, if you take away everything, he's going to curse you. He goes, very well. So Satan says, let me test him. Let me take everything away. Let me test him. God says, fine. You're allowed to test him. You can't kill him. You're not allowed to kill him. Right? Doesn't deserve to die. So he tests him with all these things. Yeah. What was Job's response? Does he blaspheme? No. Does he have difficulty? He has difficulty. At the end it says God gave him everything back, gave him his kids back, gave him wealth back, and took care of him, but he suffered. He went through difficulty. Right? So, see, that's the thing. If someone had it good and someone had it easy, right? Let's say they were granted when they were younger, an easier life, wealth, upper middle class, whatever. Then it gets taken away. Now, what's the test? The test is if they would say anything bad, if they would say all the people I helped, all the things I did when I had money, They lose all their mitzvahs. They lose every single one of their mitzvahs when they complain in that way. So the test could be, I'm not saying always, but I think a good idea would be, the test is going to be, is the person going to be thankful for the good that they have? Are they going to be thankful now for the little that they have? That's going to be the test. Yeah, so you're right. God giveth, God taketh away. Good. What's the reaction? What's the reaction? Because this happens to anybody. Are they going to thank God for the goodness? Or are they going to complain, why is this happening now? What did I do to deserve this? Or life isn't fair, I shouldn't have had to lose. Maybe. But are they going to be thankful for the goodness that they had for all the years? All the years of plenty. Because if they're not thankful and they complain, they lose every single mitzvah they did. Every single person they helped, gonzo. They lose it. They lose it. That's the right. So to understand why does God do that? It's punishment, obviously. Right? But certainly for most people, it's going to be punishment. For some people, let's say that's going to be the test. Are they going to blaspheme or not? Are they going to say it was all bad? Right? So I think in a certain way, that was my test. I could be wrong. I don't know. But, had it easy for many years. Right? For many, many years. And it could be that was the test. Still the test. He's going to be thankful for even hardship. He's going to remember the years of plenty. Or just complain and say, woe is me, the years of plenty weren't worth anything. If you say that, you're in serious trouble. Serious trouble. Now, again, can I say 100% that's the test? No. I think that's certainly part of it. Definitely part of it. So if you're on both sides of the coin, you can understand when you're on the upper side. Right? For sure you can understand that. Right? But when you're suffering, it's harder to. When you have very little, it's harder to. Right? But if a person's going to come back and say, it all wasn't worth it, someone asked this many years ago, after this happened. They said, do you have any regret or remorse you helped anybody? Now, if I would have said yes, it's over. Every single mitzvah that you did until that point, gone. Gone. You don't get them back. For all those people struggling, this and that you helped, and use more money than you made and this and that, all those mitzvahs are gone. Learning institution, you paid people salaries for a number of years, gone. All that learning, gone. You could lose everything. It's a test. It's a very big test. Right? That there's no question. It's a big test. It's a big test. Right? Are you thankful for what you had? Or are you going to blaspheme? That was the test of Job. Right? And God says he's never going to blaspheme against me. So the Satan says, let me test him. God says, okay. I'm going to let you test him. You can take away everything. You can make him suffer. You can't kill him. Right? Here's where you see that he can't do what he wants. Yeah? He has to listen to what God says here. Angels don't have free will. So he has to do what he says. So he can test him. He can make his life a misery. Take away his wife. Take away his kids. Take away his wealth. Leave him in pain health-wise. Do all these things. Come on, Job. What happened over here? God let you down, didn't he? No? You're bad luck. No? He didn't give it. He didn't give it. That was a test. That was a test. Is he going to say bad things or not against God? Because he had a lot of goodness. Right? He had it easy. God gave him everything. Very good. Okay, God took it away. Is he going to blaspheme? No. He's not going to blaspheme. Could he? Be angry. Sure could be angry. Could also be angry. Say why this happened, it shouldn't have happened, it was above nature, blah, blah, blah. All these different things could make a claim. Wouldn't be a valid claim, right? Could a person complain? Sure. Right? They could complain. But if they regret what they did and how they helped others, that's bad. Could I understand someone could do that? Yes. How do I know? Because I've been there. Right? That was never my question. That was never my question. A different question. If God gave you certain talent, and now you can't use it, what's the purpose of having the talent? That was my question. And partially the answer was painful to hear. You can't use it. You got to do other things. But if you're good at something, why would it be taken away? Could be different reasons. Doesn't matter. Right? But that was my question. That was essentially my question. If you have a certain talent, why can't you use it? Why should other people be able to use it? You can't. Right? And the answer really was not your time to use it. You had the time. It's not your time then. Why? I don't know. But through that led to other things, led to other growing, put me in a position to do other things now at a much higher level. At a whole totally different level. But I wouldn't have got to that had this not happened. But you can say, well, would you rather not happen? Yeah. Would you rather, other decisions go on differently? Yes. But they didn't. That's all part of the test. But that made me stronger? Yeah, it made me stronger. Did it take me to a different level where I could do other things now at a different level than I could before? Absolutely. Absolutely nothing to talk about. Has it manifested? Let's ask like this. Has it manifested itself in a way that I want to be able to use it? No. 100%. I got a lot of things I want to do. Okay. When's it going to happen? Can't answer. It'll happen when God wants it to happen. If he wants it to happen. But I'm totally equipped in a different way now. So you say, is it worth it? That was worth it. Is it a hardship? Of course it's a hardship. No one's going to say not. For sure no one's going to say not. Yeah. But does it form who we are because of it? Yes. Doesn't mean it's going to be easy. Nothing is going to be easy. Right? But again, as we always say, King Solomon says, you have to want it more than anything else. More than gold, more than silver, more than diamonds. You have to really want it. And you have to do it. And you have to have a ratzon, you have to have a desire. Because if you don't, you won't do it. It won't get done. Just like, right before Rosh Hashanah. So I made a Siyum Shas, finished the entire Talmud. Yeah. And I did it in front of my Rebbe. That was a huge thing. Huge accomplishment. Yeah. But you had to be driven to do it. Had to be driven to do it. Been years. Last 20 years. Finishing up different things that, I didn't do. Day in and day out. Sometimes it's better, sometimes not, sometimes this, that. You got to be driven. You got to want it. I am living proof. You got to want it more than anything else. If you want it more than anything else, God's going to open doors. Doesn't mean other aspects of your life go the way you want. That's not what it means. But you have to want it. So people ask the question, where do you get that desire from? Because it's the most important thing you'll ever do. Learning Torah is the most important thing you ever do. You have to make the time to do it. And it doesn't matter. You have to make the time to do it. 10 minutes a day, an hour a day, whatever. You have to have fixed times to learn. That's the bottom line. Right? And you have to do it. And you have to work hard. And you have to, try and change and try and be better and all these things. Right? But sometimes it's overlooked. Sometimes there's too many things going on. It's like, my brain can't handle it. My soul can't handle it. Okay. Right? We still got to keep going. You got to be like, I was called the Energizer Bunny, right? You go till you drop. That's my motto. You go till you drop. That's it. Because in the next world, you can sleep as much as you want. My Rebbe would disagree with that and say you got plenty of things to do in the next world. But at the end of the day, At the end of the day, we're only here 70 years. You have strength 80 years. Anything over that's a bonus. We're not here very long. Got to maximize. You have to maximize. Do as much as we can. You're more tired, you're less tired, this, that, doesn't matter. You got to find the time to learn, right? You got to find the time to change. You got to work on things. It's a lifetime of work. But where does it all come from? It comes from the heart. You're going to want it. Because if you don't want it, you won't do it. And if you're not logged, if you're not locked in, you won't do it. It's very easy to take us away. Right? Financial problems could take you away. Health could take you away. Million things could take you away. But you got to kick it upside the head and say it doesn't matter. Right? I'm going to do this. It's like I'm dead to the world at this time. That's it. Someone mentioned the end of last week. So my Rebbe synagogue there in the back, there's 2 tables. Everyone else has like these other chairs and lecterns, whatever that they learn at. So I always have like all these books like on my table. So either preparing for class or other things, whatever it is. Someone says, "Wow, looks like you got looks like you got a lot of work to do here." So I said, "I always have a lot of work to do. We all have a lot of work to do, right? So you plow through, you do what you can, but you got to do it, and you got to put in the effort. It doesn't matter what's going on around you." So you say it's easier said than done. You're right. And everyone has their own Gehenna, their own hell they go through, right? Everyone has it. And so, there are times like, a certain part of the day, I just like, my head droops. Go head down 10 minutes, whatever, like, you're just tired. Brain capacity can't take it all. Not even mine. You get tired. Some people like, spritz water, they drink coffee, they this and that, do other things. Okay. People say, it's a grind, a lot of it's not, a lot of it's theoretical, some of it's not so practical. Okay, whatever it is. Spent years going through things that weren't so practical. Some things more practical, less practical. Right now, doing things more, a little more practical. Okay. Right? But at the end of the day, you gotta love what you do. That's the whole thing about love over here. You gotta love what you do. It doesn't mean every single day is gonna go the way you want. And it shouldn't be. You see, a blind person or someone's mentally challenged, that wakes you up. It shouldn't have to be that way. It should wake up ourselves, right? And not do things according to Torah, because I did it yesterday, I did it the day before, and I did this, and I did that. Here's more of my Hasidic side here coming out. I got to sing and dance a little more. Got to want it more than anything else. You just got to do it. Just do it. That's what you got to do. Doesn't matter what's going on during the day. You got to put your best foot forward. But remember one thing, I'm going to end with this. Remember one thing. No matter what a person does, however they do it, and they put their best foot forward, do not look at your bank account and say, I'm a loser. Never, ever do that. It's very tempting to do. Because other people may tell you that. You should work harder, you should do this, advertise more. It doesn't matter in your advertising. I spoke about this in Pirkei Avos last night. You should watch my video on Pirkei Avos. I put it up. My YouTube channel, my Facebook channel. Right, at Michael Kaufman or Beyond Orthodox Version Judaism on Facebook or YouTube. I spoke about it. It's not about the effort you put in. That's part of it. God has to bless it. Right? But you got to do it anyway. So if you're putting your best foot forward, this is a divine decree. That was the point. That's the point where Peterman was saying, this is a divine decree. And you can't break the divine decree unless God allows you to break the divine decree. And sometimes it's better, sometimes it's worse. Okay. But that's not in your control. What's in your control is what you do. But a person makes a mistake and say, if I would advertise like this, if I would do like this person, if I would do like that, things are going to change. Maybe. It's not a guarantee for nothing. That's exactly what Peterman said. It's not a guarantee. You know why it's not a guarantee? Because God has to bless it. If God doesn't bless it, it's a divine decree. The reason you're suffering in livelihood is because God wants you to suffer in livelihood. Period. So that's one thing you have to acknowledge. But what's the second thing you have to do? You have to pray. That's what you have to pray. As I mentioned last night. I'm going to go through it again. Right? I mentioned last night. You got to beg. That's what you have to do. You have to beg. Rabbi says if you beg, you get your prayers answered. You say, I keep begging. Keep begging. You don't stop. Right? 100% you don't stop. All right. I think I'm going to stop there. I do this every Sunday. 9 o'clock Eastern Time, 4 o'clock Israel Time. Anyone has any questions, find me on Facebook at Michael Kaufman, Beyond Orthodox Conversion Judaism, OrthodoxConversion.com. Beyond Orthodox Conversion Judaism on YouTube. There I got videos, Q&As, Ethics of Our Fathers, Book of Leviticus. If you want to send me an email, rabbichaimkaufman@gmail.com, RBBIChaimCoffman @gmail.com. Wish everyone a good beginning of the day, middle of the day,